In high school, I finished in the top 5% of my class, and my SAT scores are what got me scholarships to a lot of different schools. I had over $200,000 of scholarships to private and public universities, but I ended up choosing Clemson, which I got a pretty big scholarship to. After I got my grades back on the first test, they weren't nearly what I was used to. They were way under the average that I was used to having in high school. And in my head, I thought it would be smarter to study twice as much, look over the same points, and try to maybe dig into it a little farther. But I still was getting wrapped around the key points of a paragraph, something like that, to that I studied too much of what was already supposed to be known by the student, and I didn't really blend the ideas together and learn how to apply it. I pretty much was just trying to memorize everything that was in the book, and if you don't understand something to the extent the professor wants you to, memorization's not going to work. You're going to forget what you're supposed to know, and I just spent more time trying to memorize it, and it was more of a just remembering instead of actually learning the material and put it together. I was just trying to get by that test and wasn't worrying about afterwards or anything. So it obviously didn't work at all, and the time that I put in was a waste because I got a grade probably 5 points higher than before, but it was not anything close to what I wanted. So it didn't work well at all. I didn't know how to study when I went to college, and it became a huge problem for me, and thank goodness that I got a second chance and actually had help learning what the college professors were expecting and what I needed to do, so that now I'm finally back on track and I know the huge difference between college and high school. And I think this is what a lot of my friends have had to come home for the same reasons. They didn't know how to study or do the work that was expected by the professor, and we were so used to having a high school teacher kind of walk us through it. But yesterday at the workshop, it blew my mind because I wish somebody had told me that before I had gone to school, and that would have grounded me a lot more.
In community college, I was an excellent student. My GPA was 3.69 when I finished. And I was very involved. When I was in community college, I was the vice president of the ambassadors. I was the leader of the service corps. I was one of only 2 students on the whole campus chosen to be on the trio advisory committee, plus many other things. I was constantly giving tours and talking to people and recruiting. So I was a very big and very good student. I put a lot of time and pride while I was in the community college. And when I came here, I feel like I did the same thing, and I think that's what caught up with me.
How so?
Well, when I came here, I wasn't as involved because it was a new setting. So I wanted to kind of get the feel of things before I started getting involved. But my study habits were the same, and which worked with me fine my spring semester and even my summer semester. But I started in my junior year in the fall semester, and that's when I noticed that what I was doing as far as studying wasn't working, because my test grades, I actually failed my first 2 tests. When I say my first 2 tests, I mean I had 1 test in one class and 1 test in another class, and I failed both of them. Not dramatically. It was still in the 70s, but we have to maintain at least a 78. Yes, I was putting in a lot of time, and I was being very successful in the past. So therefore, I felt like what I was doing was working. And when it didn't work, I wasn't quite sure what happened.
The first test, well, my first class was nutrition with Santos, and it was like supposed to be a sophomore level course, but they put me in it as a freshman because my grades were so high in high school. And he didn't have a book for the class. He had a disc that he wrote. It was like he wrote the textbook and put it on a disc for us. and he would just lecture from the book. I took notes as best I could, and then I would go make my flashcards, just like I did in high school. He didn't tell us how to study. He just said, these chapters you'll be tested on. So I took what the teachers told me to do in high school, and that's how I studied for that nutrition test, was the way I studied in high school. I made flashcards for everything. I think I had 200 flashcards for the first test for just 5 chapters of nutrition, and made a 58 on it. It was a 58. I cried. I was very upset. I felt like I hadn't studied for the test, even though I logged many hours doing those flashcards. It hadn't worked. I failed the next test, and it wasn't until I got a tutor here at LR that showed me, like, you can't just memorize the material. You have to actually understand it and apply it. And then the third test, I finally got an 85 on. Well, I made more flashcards than the first test. I think I had about 300 flashcards for the second test. And what else was it I did differently? I tried to do differently. I tried reading the material before class. I never had to read the textbook before in high school. Like, I never did it. And so for the second test, I was like, well, maybe if I can read the material before class, it'll help. That didn't really help me because I wasn't reading it the correct way. Like, I wasn't reading it deep enough. And so I didn't do well on that test either. But then the third test, the tutoring helped, and an upperclassman, showed me how to think about the questions and how to think about the material as I was reading. Oh yeah, I try to do 45 minutes to an hour extra a day studying for this for the second nutrition test.
And still didn't do well.
Mm-mm. And then for the third test, going with that tutor, and her showing me, okay, when you read these chapters, this is what you want to be thinking about while you're reading them. And she made some practice questions for me, and she was like, here's how you want to think about the question. She was like, think of it as a whole. And I actually studied less for the third test, but since I studied a totally different way, I went from a 58, 63 range to an 85.